Good morning, everybody, and welcome to your 2022 construction update. My name is Nathaniel, or Nat Chalaku, and I'm a committee member for the IOSH construction group and chair of the IOSH Bristol and West branch and chair of the Southwest Working Well Together group, of which we'll hear a little bit more about later. Today is about collaboration between different industry stakeholders to give you a construction update for 2022. I would like to warmly welcome Richard Voke from Temple Bright, Gren Tipper, who's going to talk about the CLC and Cognac, Malcolm Shields from the construction group, Joe Mitchell from the HSE. As you can see today, we're going to talk a little bit about have a legal update. We're going to talk about, as I just mentioned, Cognac and the Construction Leadership Council. We're going to have a wellbeing case study from Malcolm. And then we're going to talk about the Working Well Together group and how the industry can help the rest of the industry in construction. We'll then have a speaker Q&A session, any questions, final remark and close. Before we start that, I basically want to detail a couple of other items that are happening over the next couple of months. So the IOSH construction group on February the 23rd at 1 p.m, they're going to have a discussion and webinar about demolition. That will be co-hosted by the Chiltern branch. And then the IOSH Bristol and West group on March the 8th will talk about some of the control measures for construction for noise and dust, and also how other industries can put those practices into place as well. And Bristol and West will also be hosting at 10 a.m. on April the 12th, a drug and alcohol testing session. So on today's webinar about the construction update 2022. For those of you who are updating your CPD, we've basically put together the competency framework that you'll be listening to and you can put in your CPD. So today we'll be talking a bit of collaboration, stakeholder management, communication, working with others, leadership and management, strategy, health and safety law, and risk management. And if you want to find out a little bit more about the competency framework, then I've put up a little QR code in the corner there, and please do scan that with your phones, and that will take you to the IOSH Competency Framework website. I'll now be handing over to one of our guest speakers, Richard Voke from Temple Bright, who will be giving us a legal update.
Right, hopefully everybody can hear me. My name is Richard Voke. Very pleased to be giving this talk. The subjects I'll be going over is the new Building Safety Bill and associated legislation. Apologies for those people who tuned into the IOSH update a few weeks back where Phil Newton did an excellent version of this, but I've been asked to do my take on it. Then I'll be briefly touching on stress and mental health in construction, a few construction cases and statistics, and then, as we don't have, as usual, our HSE inspector giving his sort of roundup of what he's been up to for the last year, I'll do a similar type thing of what I've been up to. So let's start off. That's me, an inspector, not inspector, a lawyer for the last 20 years. I was an inspector in the HSE before that for 8 years, mainly in major hazards, and before that a scientist. Always put that up because it will inform some of the things that I will be talking about. So onto the Building Safety Bill, or the Act as it's going to become. You will all remember the terrible situation at Grenfell, 72 deaths, where the investigation was led by Dame Judith Hackett, late of the HSE at the time. She was the Director General. She led the investigation. She came up with a number of conclusions and recommendations. Basically, she said that the system for maintenance, refurbishment, etc., for those type of buildings was not fit for purpose. The legislative framework was not fit for purpose. And she came up with a solution, her solution for a very clear model of risk ownership with clear risk not clear responsibilities for the client, designer, contractor, and owner to demonstrate the delivery and maintenance of safe buildings. You will all recognize that immediately as CDM in thin disguise, and that was it. Given her background in the HSE, I suppose that's not particularly surprising. Okay, before we go on, perhaps just to look at a few preliminary pieces of information which may prove useful as we go through. Building risk needs to be defined, because building safety risk is something that pervades throughout the Building Safety Act, and building safety is basically a risk of fire spread and structural failure. So fire spread and structural failure, and indeed an explosion event. An explosion event may cause the spread of fire and the loss of structural integrity. So when we talk about building safety risks, that's what I'll be referring to. It's specified within the Act. Who are we talking about? It's 1.3 million residents in residential buildings over 18 meters, so quite a lot of people. Also, we need to think about jurisdiction. This is a bit of a movable feast at the moment as the Act progresses. At the moment, it's definitely England and mostly Wales. Wales, because they're looking at what's being developed in England and may perhaps provide a wider coverage in the buildings than the Act will end up within England. So they may go beyond the 18 meters and beyond the 7 stories, in the sense that they may include other type of buildings. Scotland and Northern Ireland are keeping an eye on things, and they will develop their legislation as and when, but fairly soon afterwards. Where are we at the moment in the development of the bill getting onto the statute book? We're at the Lords Committee stage, which the next sitting will be, I think it's 21st of February, in a couple of weeks. They're hoping to get to royal assent by the summer this year, but it's proving quite contentious. As you will remember, a couple of weeks ago, there was Michael Gove sort of dropping a bombshell that he wants developers and cladding companies to develop or to provide the costs for the leaseholders. So that's going to be quite controversial, and indeed will probably delay things. But anyway, that's the timetable with what we got. Here's a screen full of legislation. Please don't worry, we're not going to go through it. But what I want to get across there is the fact that, like the Health and Safety at Work Act, although we'll have the Building Safety Act as an overarching piece of legislation, and like the Health and Safety at Work Act, it will have a lot of content and a lot of obligations and duties in there. It will spawn a number of regulations, secondary legislation, regulations that in the Health and Safety Work Act we're familiar with, such as CDM itself, or the management regs, or PURE, or workplace, all those sort of regulations, COSH, lead at work, asbestos, electricity, all the regulations that provide the sort of guts of what the Health and Safety at Work Act wants to get across. In the same way, the Building Safety Act will get across the detail through these sets of regulations. In fact, a lot of what I'll be talking about will be from these regulations. What they're doing is they're publishing the drafts. Remember, they're all drafts. Nothing is in force at the moment. So all these are drafts. They're publishing as they go along to provide maximum transparency about what the Building Safety Act will be all about. It will be about what it says itself, and it will be about the detail provided in these regulations. A small digression from our main theme. 3/4 way down that slide, you can see the construction product regulations there. Construction product regulations, these concern construction products that are placed in the UK market that may have to be withdrawn if they present a risk. And you can see there the sort of shadow of Grenfell coming through there. So if construction product, you can think about the cladding straight away, if that's put on the market and then for whatever reason is decided it's presenting a risk, then these regulations allow the powers to have that product removed. So, as I say, a slight digression there, but people may be interested in that because it's been trailed in the press. Another digression, I suppose, but you can't really talk about legislation coming out of Grenfell unless you talk about the fire legislation, and you'll be aware the Fire Safety Act recently came in that changed and made amendments to the Fire Safety Order, or more properly called the Regulatory Reform Fire Safety Order 2005, but we'll call it the FSO, the Fire Safety Order. It amended that to clarify that external walls and balconies and windows and flat entrances in multi-occupied residential buildings will be covered by the Fire Safety Order. Again, you can see the influence of Grenfell coming there. But as well as the Fire Safety Act making amendments to the Fire Safety Order, remember the Fire Safety Order is in existence at the moment and we're hopefully quite familiar with it. The Building Safety Act will also make amendments to the Fire Safety Order. So it sort of knits in well with the themes of the Building Safety Act and the associated legislation. And that will mainly sort of concentrates on the responsible person's duties under the Fire Safety Order, the competence of the responsible person, the fact that the responsible person's risk assessments should be recorded now, and the responsible person should be providing suitable and sufficient information to residents in residential buildings. It also will tune in with the concept of high-risk buildings, and the responsible person will have to cooperate with the duty holders, who we're going to talk about in a minute, who are part of the Building Safety Act regime. Okay, new regime, new regulator. Well, in fact, it's an old regulator, sort of buffed up and given a sort of shiny coat. It is my old colleagues in the HSE, and they will be looking after a new stringent regime for high-risk buildings, HRBs. Already, we discussed regulate to higher build risks, so they are 7 stories high or at least 18 meters. They almost must have 2 residential units involved, and the Act will apply also to hospitals and care homes during the design and construction phase if they meet the size criteria. So if they are over, or they are 7 stories or higher, or 18 meters or higher. Back, as I say, the Welsh devolved legislature and the Scottish and the Irish may, in fact, widen that scope. But at the moment, that's what we've got at the moment. The HSE will do what they do best: approve, enforce, and prosecute. They'll set up registers for competence of building inspectors and registered high-rise buildings, and they'll set up sort of expert panels and committees to deal with competence within the industry and setting out guidance and standards and all the things that they do. And we're familiar with when they're dealing with standard or more health and safety that we are familiar with. There'll be a residents panel that they'll tune in with, which will give a voice to residents to matters that will affect them. So duty holders at the design and construction phase. This will be sort of familiar and unfamiliar in parts to people. In design and construction, we're talking basically CDM duty holders, with a few sort of add-ons, so CDM plus. That'll be the familiar part. I suppose the unfamiliar part will be the fact that the legislation is not made under the Health and Safety at Work, etc. Act. It's made under the Building Act 1984, and it doesn't have, so far as reasonably practicable, qualifying the legislation as it does under the Health and Safety at Work Act and the associated regulations. Some people are getting concerned about this. I'm not so sure. Although we think reasonable practicability sort of infuses everything in health and safety, there is a lot of legislation, both in the Act and in the health and safety regulations, that has the more absolute approach, doesn't have, so far as reasonably practicable in them. You think the ones in PURE and workplace regs, those sort of things where the absolute standards are set. And also we're quite used to dealing with environmental laws. Most of you will have some duties with regard to the environment, and you're used to dealing with those, and those obviously don't touch so far as reasonably practicable. So I don't think it's going to be so much of a problem. So looking at the client must. So, you know, there's a very imperative word there. The client must make suitable arrangements for planning, management, etc. in a project. So again, very familiar. Provide information, appoint competent PDs, principal designers, and competent principal contractors, PCs, and appoint them in writing. They're already going to be appointed in writing for their CDM roles, but this is going to add another bit of appointing in the Building Safety Act. So what's interesting here is that they've got to be competent. We know all about that competence with skills, knowledge, and experience, but under this Act, it's going to be skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. So if you've got SCEB, skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. Behaviours is something, well, it's new to me. I've seen some papers written on it. I suppose it's the way people apply their skills, knowledge, and experience in an appropriate way, and perhaps it'll allow past misdemeanours to be taken into account when people are being put forward to the HSE as being competent. You know, perhaps if previous prosecutions or notices or whatever being put on an organisation. So principal designer and principal contractor's duties, I don't want to spend much time on those because they will just echo what we know about from CDM, but they will apply to the requirements, particularly building approval and sorting out building regs under the Act. What's interesting is that if it's going to be an organisation who's going to be the PC or indeed the PD, which is often the case, they will have to designate an individual, so who's got the SCEB, the skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours to lead the project. So that's the duty holders for design and construction, looking at in occupation, so when the building is constructed, or if you remember that this legislation applies to existing buildings. That's very, very important. Obviously, Grenfell and buildings like Grenfell have been up for a long time. So in existing buildings, there will be an accountable person when the building is in occupation. So an accountable person at AP for residential high-risk buildings, and again can be an individual or organisation. So I imagine sort of management organisations will be to the fore there. And the AP, the accountable person, the app, will have the overall responsibility to take reasonable steps. Reasonable steps was used in the designation or the duties of the principal designer to take reasonable steps to ensure cooperation. So all is not lost. We haven't lost a qualifying part of the laws, you know, so reasonable steps, similar to so far as reasonably practicable. I know a lot of lawyers will start shouting at this, but anyway, go with me for now, in the sense that you've got this sort of cost-benefit analysis. So anyway, back to the accountable person, all reasonable steps to prevent and or reduce a building safety risk. And we know what a building safety risk, it pertains to fire and fire issues, and it pertains to structural integrity, so prevent a safety risk eventuating. And also, but if that safety risk does eventuate, if there is a spread of fire, if there is a structural failure, they've got an overall duty to do what they can to take reasonable steps to reduce the seriousness of that building safety risk if it eventuates. If there's more than one app, more than one accountable person, then we've got a PAP, we've got a principal accounting person. So one of the apps is chosen. It's usually, I've read that it's going to be the person who, the app that looks after the external skin of the building and communal areas. But in addition to the overall duty, the PAP or the app must register the building with the regulator, the building safety regulator. Not allowed to have the building occupied unless it's registered. And then at some stage get a building assessment certificate. That's not requiring to happen before the building is occupied. If you imagine, as we say, this is dealing with existing buildings, but that building assessment certificate needs to be got at some stage, and in fact is probably going to be called forward by the HSE. They are going to ask the app or PAP at some stage to provide it, and that's going to be part of the transition period for the implementation of the legislation. They also must prepare a safety case. A safety case will be familiar with those amongst you who are used to dealing with the major hazard industries in this country, or maybe the railways, and indeed the nuclear industry, where a safety case is brought forward, where you look at the risk, the building safety risks, you do the assessments, and you take the reasonable steps to control them, and you have to prove that within your safety case to the regulator. They will also have to appoint and register with the regulator a building safety manager. That can be an organisation or individual who will manage the day-to-day safety. That person or organisation can be the PAP or the app if they can convince the HSE that they are competent. The residents will have duties themselves, not to create building risks themselves, cooperate with the AP and not mess around with the safety arrangements. Okay, going on to how the regulator will oversee building and development of high-risk buildings. If you remember, we're talking about a certain group of high-risk buildings, over 18 metres, 7 stories or more. There's the gateway system, gateway 1, 2 and 3. Gateway 1 is basically in planning, and the HSE has reduced involvement there. It's a statutory consultee, as it is in the major hazard legislation already in this country. But that's under the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, not under the Building Safety Act. So the HSE's regulatory role comes more in Gateway 2, which is a sort of, they come in as gatekeepers before construction, where they will be looking after building control approval, consult with the fire authority and sewerage undertaker. They'll set conditions, they'll look at all the plans in the a process is put forward by the developer or whoever to build the building in compliance with the law. They may say that's not good enough and may set conditions. They will be looking for change control mechanisms. So they'll be contacted by the developer who may change their approach midway through construction. And also this will be the introduction of golden thread. The golden thread information, starting off with plans and the fire statements, and you know, in future the safety case in resident, how they're going to engage residents, etc. That information that will be sort of parceled together and stored and passed from the sort of development, construction, occupation, and maybe in the decommissioning stage of the sort of cradle to grave management of that building. A lot of information. BIM will come to the fore on that building information modelling, which as I'm a big fan of, not just for this sort of thing, but also for accident management or accident prevention. And then on to Gateway 3 was where the construction's finished. Hopefully we've got the finished article there, and there the organisation, the developers will apply for a completion certificate so they can hand over the building to the occupiers. And that certificate will be allowed if the regulator looks at the documents being produced, the golden thread documents, the statements of compliance of the PDs and PCs, of principal contractors and principal designers. There will be consultation with the fire authority and sewage undertakers. There'll be inspections. It could be a partial completion certificate because the developers may want to occupy the building while it's not complete in other areas. And all those sort of shenanigans will go on, and there'll be an appeals process if the HSE provide conditions or refuse it, and the developer wants to appeal against that. Right, on to mandatory occurrences. This is a requirement of the Act. This is quite a simple concept, but it's sort of complicated by the definitions there, but I'll try and get through it as quickly as possible and as clearly as possible. A mandatory occurrence, this is where a safety occurrence happens, so an event happens that indicates that something's gone wrong. This could be in the planning stage, it can be in the development stage in the sense of construction, it can be in the occupation phase. So an occurrence that has gone wrong and gives rise to a risk condition. A risk condition is a defined term, and it's on your thing there, that a risk condition is without remedy, the incident or situation will present a risk of significant number of deaths or serious injury to a significant number of people. So heavy duty risk there. So this is where a occurrence happens that is related to, again, building risk safety, so fire, structural integrity, and it may give rise to a risk condition if nothing is done about it, if nothing's done in the planning or in the construction or in the occupancy, and you get this risk condition. The duty holders in relation to this will be, during the design and build, will be the CDM type duty holders, and in the occupations will be the PAPs, the accountable persons, or the PAPs. No, the PAPs or the apps, as it were. And they will have duties to record what's going on. That will go into the golden thread information, report it to the regulator and deal with the regulator and how they're going to sort it out. And also they have to have a proactive role there in having inspections and auditing to try and suss out or try and identify these mandatory occurrences, these safety occurrences that have to be reported on a mandatory basis, and proactively seek them out. So again, there's going to be issues there of competence, because this is all about risk. So you've got to find them, hopefully, before they happen. So have you got the people as part of that process who have the competence to pursue and find those occurrences? Anyway, so what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? It's a very complex system, so lots of things can go wrong. So we've got the regulator, as well as its advisory and approval role. It's got its powers to issue compliance notices and stop notices, which are improvement notices and prohibition notices in other clothing. Again, can get heavy if those are ignored. Obviously, this is a serious business. We go back to Grenfell, and that's still echoing around. So there are custodial sentences and limited fines if there's not compliance. The offences there, you can see the offences listed underneath there: occupying without completion certificate, and going down to the sort of catch-all, which is the breach giving rise to risk or death or serious injury. Before we move on from this, remember that individuals can be caught in this. So that's where the custodial sentence will come in. Individuals will be consulted, just the same as the Health and Safety at Work Act, Section 37 situation, where you can say a breach occurs, a company or an organisation commits a breach under this legislation, and that breach was with the consent, connivance and or neglect or knowledge of neglect of a senior or strategic manager, and that person can also be prosecuted. Cheerful stuff. Again, slightly less than cheerful stuff. Moving away from the Building Safety Act, I don't think any talks in this day and age really, particularly in construction, can take place without some discussion of mental health issues. People keep saying, well, we're waiting for the next asbestos situation to arise, looking for substances that may cause that. In fact, we've got it already, I believe, with mental health, stress, anxiety, whatever, however it manifests itself. This is the new asbestos, and I think Malcolm is going to develop this theme after. High suicide rates in construction. I suppose construction is dominated by men of a certain age, and so young men going into middle age. These are the primary people who do commit suicide in this country, and construction seems to have more than its fair share. Possible causes, you all have your own ideas, but common ones: long hours, working away from home, people getting bored, so getting into drink, drugs and gambling. Some places will be regarded as a fairly unforgiving culture, and job insecurity. But these are the things construction related, but these add on to the non-work factors that we all have outside our own work. So our HSE getting involved enough. We've had for a number of years now the management standards, people really engaged with those. Just before Christmas we had the Working Minds campaign, so the HSE are sort of upping their game on this. Those bullet points at the bottom of the slide there are on the HSE website, saying this is to combat suicide within the construction industry, being flexible, allowing workers for time for counselling or medical appointments. Get other advice. It actually says that to get advice from solicitors. I don't think that's going to cheer them up much. And directing people to health, like GP, employment advisory panel programs, etc. Those sort of things. People in the industry may be more likely to engage in the sort of ISO systems, like there's the ISO system 45003, which deals with psychosocial matters in industry, not just construction, but that's talking about risk assessments and control measures that you may be more familiar with under ISO 14001 and 45001. And I'm sure the insurance companies are getting involved into this. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'll whiz on. Looking at construction statistics, I won't spend much time on that. I'm a lawyer, so I always deal with the miserable things, fatalities. If you look at the usual suspects there of what causes fatalities in construction, falls from height up to 15%, then you've got the trapped by something collapsing, or struck by something moving or flying, struck by a moving vehicle, and contact with moving machinery. And here I'm trying to make up for not having our usual HSE inspector. I'll talk about my sort of caseload in relation to that. This is my caseload of fatalities I'm involved at the moment, defending. There's 8 cases there. Actually, one's just about finished. But anyway, looking at those, I've got 2 cases of fall from height. The age thing I'll come back to, the age in the brackets I'll come back to. 2 cases struck by moving vehicles, 1 struck by a moving object, and 3 cases to do with fatalities when contact with moving machinery. So of those cases, I don't really reflect the national figures or the national pattern there. My falls from heights are less, in fact, than a moving machinery. But anyway, in the brackets there, the ages thing. This is one of my hobby horses, as people will know. Under the management regs, required to look at enhanced risk assessment from vulnerable populations within the work population. We talk about young people, etc. But how about the age people? Perhaps it's I'm getting older and feeling more sensitive, and I haven't got to deal with saga, I'll assure you. That if you look at that, if that that chart at the bottom of the slide there, if you look at that long bar at the bottom, that's for 65 plus people. There's 1.72 deaths per 100,000 workers. That's 4 times the average for all the other ages. So 4 times as likely to die on the site if you're over 65. If you look at 60 to 64, twice as likely to die on the site if you're over 60, and then it gets less as you go down in the age. So this idea that people as they get older get wiser and more experienced and become safer, perhaps we should look at that as part of your risk assessment process. And as I say, my case is up there, the 249, one of those is, they're all in construction except the moving object one. One of those is the man was over 60, struck by a moving vehicle. In one of those cases, both the person who was killed, who was over 60, and the actual driver was of the vehicle was 70, struck by a moving object. The bloke was over 60 who had the object that was moving that killed the person. And in the machinery, the person who was operating the machine was 70. Okay. Running out of time, so I won't spend too much time on that. Notices less last year than the year before, but we've had a COVID year, so that might, well, that will obviously have an effect. Prosecutions less than last year, again because of COVID, but quite interested there, 87% conviction rate as opposed to the usual 96%. I just find out, I'm not sure why COVID will affect. I don't think it will, because cases take years to get to court, so it shouldn't do it. But anyway, as a lawyer, I'm quite interested in that, as a defence lawyer in particular. Average fine in construction, 80k per conviction this year, 57k last year. So we've got fine inflation there. And in all industries, we've got 145k as opposed to 107k. This is for, I'd say, individual convictions and cases. Obviously, you will get less levels of fines in the construction industry because the sentencing guidelines takes into account turnover. And in the construction industry, you've got the huge organisations, £4 billion turnover, and you also have a man with a white van and a ladder, and those are prosecuted a lot more easier. Cases, again, I think I'll be pretty quick on these. The places for people case, that was looking at whether a very large organisation should be defined in sentencing terms, if a very large organisation should be fined more significantly than just a large organisation. If you think about the £50 million threshold for a large organisation when you're talking about sentencing under the sentencing guidelines. Okay, look that up if that's your thing. The WH at Malcolm case may send a few shivers down the spines of construction. A very high fine, 6.6 million, obviously a large organisation, but still a huge fine. Kids trespassing on a railway yard, climbing on a wagon and hitting overhead cable and being killed. But again, kids trespassing, big issue in construction sites. So that might be a case that you may wish to look at. I'll end up with a case study, again, trying to fill the gap that the inspector not being here does. This is one of my cases that went to court in the last year. It involved a large city centre construction site. My client was a contractor to the site, big deliveries on the site, vehicles over 20 tonnes. I'd say city centre, big site, but city centre, so heavy traffic and reduce access to the site, had to reverse in off the road and then drive out. And the under the supervision of traffic marshals, a substantial traffic marshal in construction contractors there. But unfortunately, there was a fatal reversing incident where a marshal was reversed into by a vehicle and was sadly killed. Traffic marshals, I'm afraid, are high-risk individuals. The issues of the case, the HSE came at us with risk assessments. My company, my client, a very good company. I would say that, but they were. Had a good track record of risk assessments for all sorts of things, including reversing, and had a sort of dynamic risk assessment system for site recognition of risk and things like that. That was looked at. The size of the vehicle, the HSE suggested that part of the risk assessment process should be looking at the size of the vehicle. Could you use less lumpy vehicles? The difficulty was with what was being delivered, and feedback on poor performance to this sort of safety management system within the company. So the traffic marshals weren't doing a particularly good job there. So should have there been recognised by the people who are going to the site, feeding it back to the company, and then they should have done something about it. That was quite one of the bones of contention of the case. When you go onto somebody else's site, they have their own site traffic management. They have their control measures, other traffic marshals. Should you be able to rely on them? That was one of the big issues of the case. There's two defendants, both of us well over the large company threshold, well over the 50 million turnover. The other defendant pleaded guilty. We went to trial. We pleaded not guilty. After 3 weeks, we were found guilty. It's always difficult to defend in front of a jury after a fatality. But we went in with our eyes open. We thought we had a good case, but we realised the difficulty of it, and we may be found guilty. But we thought it was in our interest to go to trial, to let the judge know that we were a good organisation, that we had good systems, that the problems in this case lay mainly elsewhere, and that worked for us. We had a fine at the end of it. To cut a long story short, we are £235,000 less than the other organisation that pleaded guilty from the start. That was even after their guilty plea. So I suppose there's more ways to skin a cat than to get a result, a more favourable result. There's no such thing as a good result when you have to go to court, but a more favourable result than just pleading guilty straight away. Anyway, so that's me finished. I think I haven't got time to go on to BIM, so I'll stop share there and hand back to Nat. So I do apologise. I think I've gone over by a few minutes. So.
Only by a couple of minutes, and that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Very insightful. It's always really good on the presentations that you do to give real life case studies. I think it really helps, and you bring it up each time, but the age is always very interesting that we have on the accidents on site, and I think we all should be aware of that. But lots of food for thought there. So I'm going to introduce Gren Tipper now from the Construction Client Leadership Group, who is going to talk about the Construction Leadership Council and Cognac. So over to you, please, Gren.
Right, good morning all. So I am Gren Tipper. I run the Construction Clients Leadership Group, and I've been involved with Cognac for the best part of 20 years actually. So quite a long time. I'm going to do a bit of an introduction first about the Construction Clients Leadership Group and what we formed as the Collaborative Client Forum. And although probably most people know this, I'm just going to touch a bit on our industry in terms of the challenges that we face, because it is a difficult industry to work within, as we all acknowledge. Right, so the Construction Clients Leadership Group was formed in the early 90s. As far as I'm aware, still it is the only one that is truly independent, just representing clients. We have an open door policy, although we're sponsored by some of the members. Basically, we invite any client who wishes to participate to join our meetings and webinars, etc. We're all about promoting client leadership, and basically it's working with the industry to get better outcomes for all, because it's acknowledging that clients have a really important leadership role and making sure all clients are aware of this and discharge their duties faithfully. We represent members, so that's in terms of what we do with Cognac and other government type work. And basically our bread and butter day-to-day activity is about enabling members to share best practice between them. So what we don't do is say, this is the way to do this, that or the other. Collectively, what we do is get members to actually say, this is how we deal with this particular issue or this particular area of construction. It works for us. Please look at it, use it if you wish, or basically adapt it or simply adopt. So, and that worked tremendously in all the years together. Excuse me. So I've just put together a list of the participating members. So it's quite broad, as you can see from the list. I'm not going to go through them individually, but we've got some leading clients there. One of the interesting things about clients is, although client leadership is important in the industry, nobody knows the number, but probably only about half what gets spent in construction are by repeat, what you can call expert or informed clients. The rest of it is, other than the domestic, is basically businesses, predominantly small businesses that need construction for a business need. The term client is totally alien to them. All they are business owners wishing to have some construction work carried out, and that's the way they see themselves. And therefore, as an industry, you really do struggle to actually communicate with them and influence them. One of my ambitions personally was to get more and more clients involved and understanding their roles. And there are a number of existing client groups out there. And what we did 2 years ago was we pulled together, it's a fairly informal group, but we meet regularly, monthly in fact at the moment. It was fortnightly during the worst of the COVID crisis. But basically, we're a forum which is the known client groups along with a bunch of leading clients. And basically, we work together, one, to improve the industry, but by and large, get behind what the CLC is doing, so the Construction Leadership Council. And you'll see at the top line there, you've got Cognac feeding in and out of the CLC, and also the Building Safety Group, which is looking at the future charter for building safety. So we act as a sort of focal point within the CCF and then bring all those other groups together. So you look at the construction industry as an environment, it is, as we all appreciate, it's complex. So there's circa 3 million people in it. So it's about 10% of the construction of the workforce in the UK. Contracting accounts for cut over 2 million jobs, and there's 234,000 businesses involved. Services account for 580,000 and 30,000 businesses, and products 210,000 and 18,000 businesses. And the output is phenomenal, 110 billion pounds, which contributes about 7% of the GDP. If you break down where the money's being spent and the activities are, so commercial and social is 45%, residential 40%, and infrastructure 15%. And that is split roughly about new build 60% and 40% refurbishment and maintenance. As an industry, it is a high cost, high risk industry, there's no ways about that. And it is also hit very swiftly by recession and overtakes when the economy begins to recover. So first to get hit, and basically we struggle basically when things start to recover, because basically individuals move out of the industry into other industries and not many come back again. We've got an aging workforce, and interestingly with the previous death toll with the older workforce, the numbers of people working over 50 is tremendous actually. As you get over 40, 50, 60, we have real problems in that when they retire, we're going to have a real problem. Notwithstanding that, we've also got a problem recruiting youngsters. It's not necessarily an attractive industry to get involved in. We still have major diversity challenges. Although we've done lots over the years, there's still more we can do. Apologies, I've jumped the slide. We are criticised for being adversarial, fragmented, reluctant to innovate, and wasteful. And this isn't recent, this has been going on for years and years. We are stuck in a certain way of working. And again, clients have a lot to actually answer for in terms of how we actually engage the construction industry. Because we do encourage, by and large, other than the informed clients who understand the risks better, we do encourage a fixed price, do it as quickly as you can mentality. We have a poor quality record and behaviours that go with it. On the Grenfell Tower part, which has basically hit the construction industry really hard over the recent years. When you look at not just what went on in terms of the fire and the deaths, etc. If you've watched the podcast that the BBC have been recording and making available, the behaviours of some of the people involved were nothing short of horrendous. The total disregard for managing things safely and doing things generally in a way which is about engendering good public spirit. It was appalling. By and large, informed clients do generally get the best from the industry because they know they're there for the long term and therefore they need long-term relationships. Others do suffer though when they haven't got the knowledge and the judgment to actually set off in the right way and demonstrate appropriate leadership, and they get the worst out of the industry. Although management of safety has improved significantly over the years, the management of health and well-being of workers is still work in progress. And if you listen to what the HSE keep telling us time and time again, is that their biggest problems are in the small sites, the small contractors working in both commercial and the domestic fields. Right, that brings on to the Construction 2025. So this is what the Construction Leadership Council is about. So they set out, this is taken from their website actually, you know, why do we need transformation? So we are nothing short of appalling in terms of productivity when compared with other parts of the economy. We are also wedded to basically methods of construction that were still evident 100, 200 years ago. And going with that is the often late and often outside the budgets that were set. If you look at the economy in general, large parts of the economy rely on the services buildings enable, and therefore if the building's not basically built in a way which lends itself to efficient working. Apologies for that. So we get moving the mouse. Yeah, you don't really get the best out of the building. So in terms of whole life, it's not really optimized. Too much effort is put into doing it as cheaply and as quickly as possible without looking at what the costs are associated with it in use. And although we actually spend a lot of time and effort looking at the building energy performance, when it actually comes to a building going live and in operation, it is often found that the energy it was designed for versus what it's actually using is about twofold out. We've got ahead of us a really big commitment from the government on housing, schools and other infrastructure, which we can all see now. And as it says here, with the double whammy really now with COVID and Brexit in particular and the ageing workforce, it really gives us some challenges. So these were the ambitious targets set by the CLC as part of the strategy. So lower costs, so a reduction of 33%, faster delivery, basically cut it in half, lower emissions, which has been overtaken by the net zero carbon work that's going on now, and 50% improvement in exports. So if you log on, if you haven't already seen this, then you can actually see that we've got this industrial strategy, the documents out there still. And also the CLC website is really good with giving updates in terms of where they are with the work they're actually progressing. So part of what's going on now is basically building off-site. So as we all know, the risks associated with working on site are phenomenal, not just in terms of health and safety, but in terms of time, quality and cost. We're in the unfortunate position at the moment where it involves heavy investment, and therefore the government is really supporting how best we actually take this forward. And this is all part of the Industry Strategy Challenge Fund. Now, having said all that about where we want to be, then we were hit by COVID. And there's a good argument actually that without COVID coming along as to whether we would end up with a similar situation with what went before with Latham, Egan, and then Wolstenholme's Never Waste a Crisis. Would things peter out? Would we continue to collaborate? And what COVID's made us do, really, when you analyse it, it's made us actually work together better and really find innovative solutions to actually carry on. In terms of the industry affected by COVID, the construction industry has probably fared better than most, because from the outset, we were looking for ways of working safely and carrying on, and the government encouraged us to do that. So what happened then with the Construction Leadership Council was basically they came up with this sort of 3 phases to get ourselves on the right path. And so it was about restart, which was the first 3 months as we sort of hit by COVID. Then reset, about driving demand, increase productivity, and strengthen the capability of supply chains. And then reinvent. And this is the reinvent bit. Although it says 12 to 24 months, we've only basically just started that. We are really in early days still. Again, you can find this on the CLC's webpage, but it shows the cross-cutting activity that's going on within it. So down the left-hand side, you've got the infrastructure, domestic RMI, and that's basically refurbishment and maintenance, housing, and basically local, social and commercial construction. Across the top there, you've got the sort of the industry change stuff, which is basically net zero carbon, digital, manufacturing performance, building safety. The people element is skills and inclusion, health and safety and well-being, which is a big chunk of where Cognac comes in, and commercial, which is about business models, export and trade. It's very quiet on the export and trade front, but there's a lot of work going on with business models in terms of how we actually contract with the industry. If you look at what is really getting the headlines here and now, is obviously net zero carbon, because that's going to give a phenomenal workload in transforming the way we actually construct future buildings and how we retrofit the existing ones. and retrofitting the existing ones gives rise to quite a number of risks associated with that. Digital, again, particularly of interest because we are very much into the technology of digital twins. So basically build it digitally first and then basically you learn from that and carry that model forward and actually model buildings thereafter. There's a lot to do here also with in the health and safety field in terms of recognising where the risks are and eliminating them. The build off site bit, if we are going to improve the performance of the industry, we've really got to get this right. Again, it requires the client side to actually get behind this and actually support it. Building safety of all these is probably the one which has got the most dominance at the moment. Again, that's to do with the outcome from Grenfell. The industry was poor at quality management, and it still is poor at quality management, if the truth be told. And the problem with, as we're all aware over the years, is we're always trying to bolt health and safety onto the construction activities, where it should be an integral part. And what we're seeing now is that the CLC is drawing on Cognac to fulfill that element of health, safety and well-being. Not in a way where give you this and you can bolt it on, actually working with them to actually build it in as part of the process of construction. The skills and inclusion one is still work in progress, and we've got a major problem there in terms of actually making sure we've got the workforce, the skilled workforce in place to actually bounce back. I'll go into more detail with the Cognac in a second. And the commercial, again, clients have got to actually work on this business model bit in terms of the type of contracts they actually enter into and make sure it is more amicable and gets the best end result for all. So for those of you who are not familiar with Cognac, it's originated from the Health and Safety Work Act in 1974, so it's been around a long time. And it was revisited following the 2001 summit to revitalise health and safety in construction and set some really ambitious targets. So that was the time when we got hit by the then Deputy Prime Minister to basically get things sorted out. The focus now is very much on the SME employer, and that is still where the majority of fatal and serious incidents occur. Health and safety, sorry, health and well-being improving, there's still work to do. Should be improvement, sorry. A lot of work is going on actually, but if you ask the question, are the behaviours there to go with it? No, they're not fully, but at least there's an acknowledgement it needs doing and there's an appetite to get on with it, but it is going to take a long time. Cognac's basically gets revisited every 3 years in terms of the constitution, and it is now directed by what is now called the Acting Together Steering Group, which is basically a steering group sitting over a number of working groups. So the members are drawn from industry. It is the industry working in partnership with the HSE. If you go back in time, it was very much HSE dominated, and what the HSE have done in more recent years is basically turn that round to be more industry focused and industry led. It all fits together with the Helping Great Britain Work Well, and it is all about preventing incidents, ill health and people being hurt. So these are the groups that sit under the Acting Together Steering Group. So you've got Supporting Small Employers Working Group, the one I'm involved with, Managing Risk Well Working Group, Keeping Pace with Change Working Group, and Tackling Ill Health. So when we set up the Supporting Small Employers Working Group, it was basic idea was to provide tools, guidance and support to small businesses. Using the research from the Health and Safety Executives Insight team, That gave birth to what we developed within the CCLG, which is the Client Buddy Scheme. And that at a simple level is the likes of me and my members being available to take a phone call from a client that doesn't really understand what a client's role is. So if you look on the CCLG website, you'll see a Client Buddy section, which basically gives them direction to all things that they need to know and where to find them. So it's not about us saying this is how you should do it. It's about saying there's a wealth of information out there, and this is where you can find it. The problem with our industry in general is there's no shortage of information. There's lots out there, but you have to go for one place for commercial information, another for health and safety, another for design, another for quality type stuff. And then you've got the myriad of all the support organisations that are out there able to assist. So what we tried to do with this Client Buddy Scheme is basically, as the CCLG say, if you go there, you can go to all these places in a logical order and find what you're looking for. And we've also commenced keeping case studies of projects about how they were set up, how they were managed, and what the learning points are. And again, as for IOSH, that's something IOSH can actually participate in if they wish to. So where they've got examples of projects that have been executed in a certain way with certain outcomes, then we can share that in a confidential manner, but basically it enables others to learn from it. So we're all about influencing small employers and occasional clients. And one thing that's come out of Cognac, particularly over the last 5 years, is the focus on occasional clients. So much work is actually let by occasional clients that really do get it wrong, and it encourages the wrong end of the industry to engage with them, you know, the white van tactics. We decided in 2021, which is continuing now, is to focus in one area only, to get that right and then move on. So, and what we've focused on is the net zero carbon. And what we've done, and again, this is another area where there's a phenomenal amount of information available, but it's all over the place. There's lots on the HSE's Cognac website as it was. That's in the process of being revamped and housed elsewhere at the moment. But all the information there, it will be available again shortly. But what we've done with the assistance of the Construction Leadership Council is we're posting all the relevant information there now. So what we've done, we've pulled some infographics together on dealing with asbestos, and that's the biggest area of concern with net zero carbon, other than the obvious ones of working at height, etc. But we put infographics together where you can actually hover over the various areas, and that will link you then to guidance information. And that's really spot on in terms of getting both the occupier and the contractors carrying out the work to the right place. So we are working with the trade side of the business and the professional bodies, and it supports the CLC work stream. That's the important part of what we're doing, is to make sure that on the net zero carbon particularly, that we've got the information that's needed to actually help them get the retrofit program sorted out quickly. One thing the industry has never done is engage those occasional clients and engaged the smaller end of the industry, the sort of micro end of the SMEs. So if organisations don't belong to a trade body, basically they're totally off the radar, and they are incredibly difficult to reach. And that's what we're focusing on now, about how best we can do that. And that was part and parcel of what the insight team of the HSE's people did to actually try and understand why and how best to deal with it and develop tools to go with it. And if it is to work long term, then there needs to be a different funding strategy, and we're still working at that. That is very much work in progress. managing risk well is about finding those trusted tools and guidance and to be able to manage risk without duplicating efforts. So a lot out there. So they're basically making sure that it is in a fashion, in an order where you can actually access it and use it quite readily. So again, I'm not going to go through this in great detail, but I see we're running out of time. But you can, these slides are all out there for you to continue reading. I'll finish on that slide in terms of where the group is on fire safety. There's a lot of work going on there to do with the construction phase fire plan. Been lots of incidents of fires on site, which have basically been a result of not taking combustion of materials into consideration in terms of packaging, etc. The Keeping Pace with Change working group is literally that. Excuse me, literally that. We are in a changing situation, and they're all geared to making sure that we're looking ahead and making sure we're putting things in place to actually support the industry. One big chunk of work they've done, which is the CDM 2020 vision, and that is about recognising that there is a cultural issue to overcome, and how best to embed CDM within the industry. Tackling ill health, again, is pulling together all that information that does exist and making it into tools that are fit for purpose and easy to use. And you can see from this the work they've been working on. Right, I'm at the end now. It's an open question to you all. We do need to mobilise as many clients as possible, which is why I get so involved with Cognac, why I was instrumental in setting up the Collaborative Client Forum. I've also worked with the Chartered Institute of Building, and they're now setting up a client group. So my question is, do you have a IOSH client group? And if you've not got one, is there an appetite to do it? And we as the CCLG are quite happy to collaborate with you to assist you in setting that up. Unless we get as many clients as possible engaged, then we're never going to change the industry the way we want it to shape up for the future. So it's important to look at every avenue where we've got access to clients. And I know from my career was in BAA, the airport operator, and all of our health and safety people, which we directly employed, were IOSH members. And therefore there must be a lot of IOSH members out there that work for clients. And therefore, wouldn't it be good if you can actually harness that potential in leadership to actually influence their employers? So that's the final slide. There are my contact details. Please do get in contact with me if you wish. It's open door all the time. And I will send these off to Nat, these slides. I did update them slightly prior to the prior to commencing. So thank you, Nat.
Thank you, Gren. That's absolutely fantastic, and it's really good to have an insight and support available to construction clients and what you do with CCLG. I think that question that you posed at the end, I think we'll kick off at our panel discussion with those questions, and then we can answer you on that one. But no, really appreciate it, and I think many of us here will be from contractors, principal contractors, so having the client's point of view is really interesting, and really appreciate that. So we've got one more brief presentation now, a 50-minute presentation before our break, and I would like to introduce my very good friend Malcolm Shields, who's chair of the IOSH Construction Group, who has a wellbeing case study for us. So I'll hand over to Malcolm now.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Right, welcome everybody, wherever you are, all around the world. I've got this lovely session of 15 minutes, and I'm just going to start it on my watch so that I don't go over on my timer. Yeah, 15 minutes, and so I'll just start by couple of quick introductions. So myself, yeah, I'm chair of the IOSH Construction Group. I work for Costain Group. I'm a package share manager on roughly £1 billion worth of highways infrastructure work. And that's a nice picture of me there with my friends in Oman. I spent a good few years in the Middle East, with Oman being my favorite country. I thought it'd be nice to just briefly introduce you to our IOSH Construction Group committee. So myself there, I'm very, very lucky in that every single individual on this committee are just a bunch of fantastic people who contribute massively. I'm lucky to have Jimmy Quinn, who is immediate past president of IOSH. I've got Lawrence, who is the current president-elect. Angela, who's heavily involved at VP level and at branch level. Vicky, Stuart, Nat, who you've seen on the call, and a massive thanks to the health and safety executive who regularly contribute to our committee. So nice quick introduction to you there. And I did post in the chat that we're looking for 3 new members. Thanks for all the people who've contacted me this morning. I'll get all the details to you later today. So I was asked to kind of well-being case study, talk about well-being, whatever. So I'm kind of just going to tell you a little story. And my story starts with these kind of first pictures. This is one of the projects that I'm currently responsible for. So it's some work on the A1 in the north of England, up very close to where I live. I actually live just about 5 minutes from the project, which is great. But just give you an idea of what we're dealing with. The typical highways construction project, you can see how we're separating our work areas from the live traffic. So we've got live traffic running close by, and we're protected by the concrete barrier and speed limits. Some areas we've got a lot of space, picture on the right. Other areas it's really tight. So that's our kind of work area. In terms of well-being and mental health, this is what we are trying to do. We're trying, there's a lot of stuff out there about behavioral safety and behavioral science, etc. To me, what you need to do is create the right environment. If you do that, you create an environment where people come to work enjoying it, where they feel comfortable, where they feel safe, where they can openly talk, where they feel valued. You'll not be going far wrong. And there's just some examples of what we are doing and trying to do. We genuinely listen. We don't listen to already having a response to come back with something. We listen to what people say at every level of the organization. We have a fantastic employee assistance program, which is available not only to our employees, but the whole of our supply chain. They're all welcome to it. They all get given the information around it, and it's there for them to use. We have we're really concentrating on that early engagement. Construction, highways construction, etc., and it's the same all the way around the world. It's a transient type of industry in terms of the workforce. You will always have a lot of the supply chain coming onto their job, working for a period of time, and then moving on and going to another. So you really need to engage with them as early as possible to try and get some kind of buy-in from them. So right from induction to, we have start of shift briefings every single morning to engage with the site ops and everybody on site. And we also were brought in some fantastic external speakers last year and early this year. We had Louise, who was fantastic, who talks about, unfortunately, losing her brother on a construction site. Jason, who fell from a ladder and hurt himself, and is such an inspirational guy now to listen to. And State of Mind, ex-rugby league players, who've had them out on site. So we're constantly thinking of different ways to engage with people on site, to constantly remind them in different ways to look after themselves and and it's okay not to be okay, and to talk about it and look after themselves. So another picture of our project here, and I'll just kind of continue the story here. So as you can see, there's a stretch, two sides of the carriageway here, north and southbound. This is the actual area where we had an incident, and the little story I would like to tell you about. You can see either side where you can see the workforce there in the work areas, the two verges of the carriageway with the concrete barrier in between them. One day, about 8 weeks ago, excuse me, prior to Christmas, we had an individual amongst one of these gangs who wanted to climb over the barrier and threw himself in front of the live traffic. You know, interesting, you know, listening to Richard earlier on about about suicides and the rates, and I'm not going to put up any statistics here. All I want you to think about is what got that individual to that point where he wanted to go over the barrier and effectively throw himself for the live traffic and end his life. So although I've only got 15 seconds, what I want you to do is just wherever you are, if you're in your office, you're at home, you're out on site, you're in a coffee shop, wherever you are, I'm going to take 20 seconds out of my 15 minutes, and I just want you, I'm going to shut up, and for 20 seconds, I want you to think about you, your family, who you love, who loves you. Have you got that picture in your mind? Imagine that guy, what picture he had in his mind before you wanted to go over those barriers. Now on to what I talked about earlier, about creating the right environment. I think we've done reasonably well on these projects. We can get better, we can always get better, but we had created an environment where that individual felt comfortable enough to open up to his colleagues. And when you think about how hopeless we are, men, at opening up and talking about our problems, he opened up in front of other male colleagues. Clearly a plea for help, and they stopped him going over those barriers. They got him the support he needed. They contacted our foreman. We got him back to the site compound. We could get him the support he needed. We got his family to site. We started dealing with things. We started signposting him in directions of professional people who could help them. And because we managed to do all of that, that individual was able to get the professional help he needed and be able to move on and deal with the rest of his life. So there's a few things that I want you to do. What I want you to do is be a bit like the guy in this photograph. Now, I'm clearly showing my age here by showing this photograph. It's an old black and white film. To Kill a Mockingbird is the film. It's the book that I read, To Kill a Mockingbird. It's still my favorite book to read. I've probably read it about 3 or 4 times. But the film, and this is the actor Gregory Peck who plays the lawyer Atticus Finch. During the film, at one point, he talks about putting yourselves into other people's shoes. So if ever, on site, you're at a meeting, you're having a coffee with somebody, whatever it is, you know, just think about what they might be going through and put yourself in their shoes. Why are they acting strangely? Why are they being aggressive? Why are they being quiet when they're normally a talkative person? All of those type of things, the things that you can look out for. So yeah, please, I want you to remember to do that. 2 other things before I finish my kind of 15 minutes. We kind of have a bit of a delivery model here, and I don't think you'll go far wrong if you follow this relatively closely. So at the end of the day, we all want this element. We want everyone to be safe from harm. Lovely objective, lovely target. Try and run a construction project where nobody gets hurt physically, well-being wise, mental health, whatever it is. We don't want anybody to have any harm. I'm convinced, after all my years working all over the world, that the right way to do that is that you create a happy, a prosperous, a harm-free environment. But there was a comment, and I think there was a question in the QE I was checking before. They were talking about leaders and clients and leadership council, etc. It has to come from everybody within there, but particularly the leaders, and empowering people down through the supply chain to be able to create that right environment. So our model is, it begins with, we listen. We listen to people in many different ways, whether that's people submitting hazard observation cards, whether it's people at safety committee meetings, whether it's people in the kitchen having a coffee, whatever it is, we listen and then we engage. And what we do, and I would absolutely urge you to do, is to act with integrity. So if you listen to somebody and you say you're going to do something, do it. Potentially incentivize certain things. We incentivize how we reward people for making good observations or spotting hazards. And that leads you through, if you do these 3 good things, do your basics brilliantly, develop good habits, and then reinforce those good habits. If you do all of that, get the basics right brilliantly, you'll move on to the next step. You'll get trust. And if somebody comes to work on your construction site and you have that environment and they develop a trust in you, they'll do this. They'll act safely, they'll look after themselves, they'll look after their colleagues, they'll actually care about people, and they'll enjoy their work. And we'll get to that side there, and we'll have an environment safe from harm. So there you go. I've stopped sharing. Got you close to I'm just about the 15 minutes. So, you know, nearly spot on that. So I'll leave you there, and I'll let them all take a break. I'll leave you and that to organise that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. Absolutely brilliant, very thought-provoking, the last slide, really, really excellent. Okay, we'll take a break now. Just like to say thank you very much to our presenters. We'll come back here at 11:45 and we will talk a little bit about the Working Well Together group, and then we'll have a panel Q&A session, and hopefully we will finish around about 12:30 today. Thank you very much. Hopefully see all you back after a brew at 1:45. Welcome back, everybody. For the next session, I would like to introduce Joe Mitchell, who works for the HSE, and he is going to talk a little bit about the Working Well Together and collaborating with small businesses in the construction industry. So over to you, Joe.
Hi, thanks, Nat. Just to make sure, can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. I'm Joe Mitchell. I work as a policy advisor for HSE, and I sit on a few different working groups that try to influence different workflows in relation to health and safety advice and guidance in the construction industry. Firstly, apologies for the lack of visuals on my part. I'm having some IT issues, and thanks to Nat as well, who's agreed to screen share for me. So what Working Well Together is well, at its core, Working Well Together is an industry-led intervention program. It's strongly supported by HSE and Cognac, and this synergy has been running successfully for over 20 years now. It's an important tool in delivering key health and safety advice to small to medium enterprises in the industry, the self-employed and micro businesses in construction. Although the health and safety standards in construction have improved significantly in recent years, the improvement is much less marked amongst Working Well Together's traditional target audience. Around 2/3 of all fatal incidents continue to occur annually on small sites where fewer than 15 people work, and the construction industry provides employment for over 2 million people, with around 90% of construction firms employing just 7 people or fewer, often referred to as SMEs. The smaller part of the industry remains challenging for the regulator to influence, with working practices and equipment often found to be unsafe and requiring enforcement by HSE action and to be put right. The small to medium enterprises and small sites in construction remain the target audience priority for HSE in 2022 and throughout 2023. And the targeted Working Well Together activities will continue to support small businesses in achieving improved risk management and control. On to the next slide, please, Nat. Thanks. So Working Well Together and how it interacts and feeds into Cognac. Historically, HSE has provided overall strategic direction and focus through paths like Cognac, HSE's construction sector, the biannual National Working Well Together Steering Group, meetings which are chaired by HSE's Working Well Together manager, who's currently Alistair Mitchell, sits on my team at HSE. The steering group meetings, which are attended by regional group chairs, HSE visiting officers and regional committee members. HSE has funded and contributed towards the cost of regional Working Well Together events, subject to each event meeting's specified criteria, matching that of the business focuses of HSE. Although throughout COVID, we've had some hiccups with this, funding remains currently available and, with the exception of a few events, can be guaranteed in the future. The workstream is directly affected by Cognac Acting Together Steering Group, or the ATSG. We meet 4 times a year to discuss actions against previous priority work in the industry and to assess new data and information to push forward with a health and safety perspective in the construction industry. So Working Well Together acts as a steering group that feeds into the Acting Together Steering Group, which is the umbrella committee that feeds down through the work streams, the different working groups that were previously mentioned in Gren's presentation. Next slide, please, Nat. So here, this is how it all fits together, like I was just talking about with the ATSG, being in the middle there, you can see in a diagram. And here are the 4 main working groups, which are tackling ill health, supporting small employers, keeping pace with change, and managing risk well. We also have the Working Well Together Steering Group, which is chaired by Alistair, and the Asbestos Network, which is feeding more and more into the actual ATSG as time moves forward. So Working Well Together remains an integral part of this alliance and operates as a boots on the ground functional tool that we hope will continue to grow and drive up engagement with those harder to reach bodies in the industry. Supported by a wider network of stakeholder groups, the Construction Industry Advisory Network, which is Cognan. You can see an example of the groups that feed into the Cognan membership on the right-hand side of the slide there. The work of the Industry Advisory Committee in Cognac is shared more widely with Cognan, most notably by hosting 2 Cognan events per year, with primary focus on information sharing and collaborative working, showing where Working Well Together fits into the bigger picture in the industry and its role in driving up health and safety engagement in construction. Next slide, please, Nat. Thank you. So the aims and objectives for the Working Well Together steering working group for 2022 through to 2023 is currently working with Cognac and some key stakeholders in the industry. Ideally, what we want to do is relaunch the brand and drive up new engagement. in a post-COVID environment. What that will look like going forward, we don't know yet. But the actual initiative itself that we forward is supposed to be an industry-driven initiative. It should be mainly businesses promoting good business practice instead of the regulator promoting good business practice. Although HSE has been involved, we're very much on the periphery of it, and it should be an industry initiative, as mentioned. One of the things that has made it successful over the years is that the industry is sharing good practice, and it's not the regulator telling them which is what appeals to small to medium enterprises, as is suggested by the data that we've gathered. It's hard as a regulator from that standpoint to push information regarding health and safety through to the harder to reach small to medium enterprises and the smaller businesses with, say, 5 to 7 employees on site. Infamously difficult to reach for health and safety information, and not only for us to reach them, but for them to feed data back through to us can be quite a task. So that is the main priority of working well together. It's engagement with the what is now the largest portion of the industry. Obviously, the way in which we do this is listed on the presentation. We like to run events for small businesses and micro businesses. In pre-COVID, we do face-to-face events, things like that. Free and low-cost information and advice, and promoting training and learning and health and safety. This was all done through, we had a website which is down at the moment as we work on getting a new one up. But a lot of the functionality of working well together was done through the website, which was up. Next slide, please, Nat. Thank you. So structure and activities. So it operates through 17 different regional groups across Great Britain. One in Scotland is associated with SiteSafe, 2 in Wales and 14 in England itself, with the aim of improving the level of occupational health and safety knowledge within the target audience. This is to influence their immediate and long-term approaches to tackling a range of priority risks that are deemed hazardous in the industry. Priority points of interest for HSE as well. Working well together has an established history of providing occupational health services and advice by running safety and health awareness days, or SHADs for short, mock trials and similar events. So this is supported by trade associations, equipment suppliers, industry employers, things like that. Also, HSE visiting officers and other operational staff are included in this. The COVID-19 pandemic and associated restrictions on things like public gatherings and face-to-face events brought a temporary halt to the delivery mechanism, with most working well together groups having to postpone and inevitably cancel events planned for 2020 and 2021. There's been, as a result of this, there's been a move towards delivering webinars and similar events online and on a wide range of topics, including things like worker height, stress and mental health, temporary works. They did one for respiratory health in support of HSE's inspection campaign, fire safety, things like that. Like was previously mentioned in another of the presentations, the COVID pandemic basically forced us into a situation where we had to use initiative and come up with new ways of getting the message out there to the industry. And one of the ways in which Working Well Together did that was to focus more on the digital webinar aspect of information delivery, such as the one that we're obviously delivering right now. So, second. So I mentioned before that there was a website which was up and running for quite a while. The website itself contained details of all 17 groups and individual information. It was an arrangement we had with Mandos, which ended in December 2021. And currently we are working on trying to develop a new website, a new host for the Working Well Together information, with some key industry stakeholders to explore different options, different paths that we can go down. But we have a I hope to get a form of website up as a landing page for people who are interested in joining or who have an interest in the Working Well Together the group to visit to find information that they need regarding memberships, joining, things like the locations of different local groups around the country. So well, we want that scheduled for release in spring this year. Yes, so we don't currently have a website at the moment, but we do have ways of contacting us. We'll talk about that on the next slide. But you can actually subscribe to the construction e-bulletin on the HSE website, which isn't solely for Working Well Together information, but does give you a good breadth of knowledge on, and breadth of information on the construction industry, which includes a lot of the initiatives that are of interest to Working Well Together groups around the country. Next slide, please, Nat. Is this slide 6, Nat? 7. There we go. Thank you. Slide 6, thanks. So the future for Working Well Together continues to be an industry-led intervention program, and it's we want it to continue to be strongly supported by HSE and Cognac. Although Working Well Together activities have been severely curtailed by the pandemic, potentially it remains a very significant mechanism for delivering the key health and safety advice on a national regional basis to SMEs and self-employed and micro businesses in the future. What has been done before has been done well, we found by looking at the data. But as the industry moves forward, there are areas that are now requiring updating and improvements, hence looking towards a new website for a landing page for people that want to have somewhere to find this information. A key point to note is that we really do need to drive up engagement in the industry. We need your help. We're trying to refresh and re-energize the Working Well Together group, which we want to be at the heart of improving the health and safety performance of the target audience, and working in conjunction with Cognac and CLC and wider industry as we move forward post-pandemic. There's an urgent need for the initiative to be revitalized. The industry remains one of the poorest performers in terms of health and safety performance, and bringing about sustained change should not be the responsibility of the regulator alone. Everyone can play their part, and we do need help in driving up engagement and memberships. Obviously, due to COVID, membership to specific groups have waned because as people have had to come away from the Working Well Together work to focus on their own businesses to stay afloat, membership and attendance has dropped. So hence the new initiative in trying to drive up engagement. So Working Well Together has been in limbo during the pandemic, but now the industry emerges post-pandemic with an opportunity to re-energize. Some groups, I mentioned, lost quite a significant portion of the membership due to personal independent struggles throughout the pandemic, and we're trying to now address that with new engagement. Next slide, please, Nat. Thanks a lot. So, as I mentioned, we no longer have a website as our contract was expired in December. We're currently in the process of engaging with key industry stakeholders to get a website hosted and up and running. The website had and will have all of the details of the 17 national groups and information regarding any upcoming events and news relating to Working Well Together. We hope to have that website up, as mentioned, by spring 2022. We'd hope to release, in regard to this, we would hope to release a press release on the launch of the new site, along with being included in the e-bulletin I mentioned on the construction e-bulletin on HSE's website. In regards to anybody who's interested in Working Well Together right now, what I can do is put mine and Alistair's, who manages Working Well Together nationally, email address into the chat, and anybody who wants to have any specific information on their local group, or who to contact to start getting involved with Working Well Together, we'd be more than happy to update you personally from our HSE accounts. So I'll add those emails into the chat for people to at their leisure send any requests through to us. Fundamentally, it's a really good opportunity for Working Well Together to be relaunched, and there really isn't another alternative for communicating with SMEs, who we found to be around about 95% of the construction industry. So you can see such a large percentage of that of the pie that we are struggling to contact. We really do want to drive up engagement and figure out a better way of getting health and safety advice through to those people. Hopefully you guys can help us do that. That's all I've got on notes there, Nat. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I will stop sharing that screen. There we go. You know, I'm very proud to represent the South West Working Well Together group, and have been doing so for 10 years now. And I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea. So, I mean, we really want to get basically construction clients, consultants, contractors together to help support, signpost, put on these safety health awareness days to really talk to, educate, and share some knowledge with the small contractors, really. And our target audience, we always say, is two men in a white van with a Jack Russell. They are the people who we're really trying to help, because when you look at the statistics, a lot of the enforcement activity and a lot of the accidents happen on small construction sites and happen to small and medium-sized businesses. So I think, you know, as the industry, as the logo goes, you know, we can help the industry, and by working, you know, together, we can really help push the message across. So please do get in contact with Joe and Alistair, and they will basically redirect your emails if you want to get along to a WWDT meeting, and hopefully we can push that forward. So what I'll do now is I'll invite the panel to open up their mics and turn on their cameras, and we will have a little Q&A session from the questions posted in the question chat. And I think when we are ready, I think we will start off with Gren's last slide that he had on his, because he was asking a question that I think perhaps maybe Malcolm and myself can talk about, and that's, you know, an IOSH, having a IOSH clients group. So Gren, if you'd like to kick off and just ask that question again, and then I'll look through at the other questions.
Right. Thanks, Nat. Just to reiterate, to actually achieve the change we all want, we've got to get access to every client we can. And my proposal is, I know for a fact from my operational days that most health and safety managers that work directly for clients are IOSH members. Therefore, you must have a vast number of members who work for clients. And therefore, wouldn't it be good if you can actually harness that group and get them to work with their employers to actually change the way they actually procure construction and how they interact with the industry? Because it's all, you know, where we are today in this industry is we're moving away from bolting on health and safety. It's about the way we actually procure construction and the way we actually demonstrate client leadership. That's going to make a real difference.
I think Malcolm has got his hand up on that one, so I'll hand over to Malcolm.
Yeah, cheers, Nat. Yeah, the really interesting point, actually, and I think it has been discussed in the past within IOSH, but certainly from my viewpoint as chair of the construction group, and as I said, I'm very lucky to have some really good people sitting on a committee with me who are heavily involved with IOSH. You know, immediate past president-elect, for example. I can certainly feed that back. And you know, I'll make a note of that, and I'll make a commitment to do that, to feed it back up through IOSH. Yep, to ask that question.
Okay, I've got a question from Ian Reid and Clive Richardson to Richard regarding your presentation and the high rise. So basically, they're asking, you know, what's the definition of a high rise building? Is this purely residential, or does it also apply to retail spaces, warehouses, etc.? And Ian basically asked a similar question, saying, you know, if the top 2 floors of a building are residential, but 80% of the building is non-residential, you know, would this qualify as a high risk building? I'm not too sure how up to speed, Richard, you are with, with that bill. But,
I've got 250 pages of the draft bill in front of me, so I can quote directly from that and say high risk building means a building in England, I'll come back to that, that is at least 18 meters in height or has at least 7 stories and contains at least 2 residential units. So if you've got a building that tall with 2 residential units, at the moment, you're covered. You're covered by the Act. If you haven't got that, you're not covered. As I said at the start, it's a movable feast, this bill at the moment. And as I said, you know, the other legislative the devolved legislations of the other home nations may say, for example, you know, include all care homes or whatever, forgetting the height thing. But at the moment, that's where the definition lies. I was just having a quick scan, actually. There is scope within the draft bill that says that if the HSE decides that there are other buildings that, because of their characteristics, should be required to be classified as high risk, then they will be able to be sort of tagged on to the Act after the Act is in force, as it were, or in force. So at the moment, that's what we've got: the height and the 2 residential components. So if you've got that, then it's heading your way at the moment, but that's at the moment. Keep an eye on the website, the HSE website, etc., for keeping you up to date.
Excellent, thank you, Richard. One for Malcolm here. Stephen Chamberlain asks, are there any mental health training courses that can be recommended? And is the best start a mental health first aid course?
There's lots of courses out there. Yeah, if the 2-day, I mean, you can do a half-day mental health awareness, which is kind of recognised by generally, you know, Mental Health England and Mates in Mind, etc. All of those kind of people. Then there's the 2-day course, and then there's a larger course if you 7-day course if you wanted to present on that subject. I would recommend that, yes, the 2-day course is good. I've done it myself. It can be quite intensive or intense. But I would encourage you to do that. But I would also encourage anybody, the mental health training and everything, you're preparing for somebody being ill, mentally struggling, and you're preparing people in your organization who can signpost or recognize signs, that type of thing. I would like you to put as much effort further back into creating that right environment and looking after people and giving them the respect they deserve and caring about them, so that they don't get to the point where your mental health first aiders are needed. So I think you need to do both, but please concentrate just as much on the early stuff as to getting the training and having your mental health first aiders in place. Have strategies right from the start about how you're going to look after people and how you're actually going to have them so that they stay in a fit state and don't get to that point.
Thank you, Malcolm. One for Gren. Stephen Rogers asks, you know, within the construction industry, there's a push for construction companies to look more closely at environmental factors at site level. And we all know about the CITB seats course. He said, is there any future developments to encourage all levels of management and duty holders, and I'm going to ask about the client here, to have an understanding of environmental issues, because at the minute it tends to be the contractors and the consultants there who educate the clients. I take it that's probably the way it will go.
The age-old problem, this one yet again, is the informed repeat clients do get it, and they do promote on the widest level. Everything which makes sense to actually support the industry and get a better outcome, they generally do. The problem is about half it gets bought by occasional clients, are normally fairly ill-informed. So the issue for all of us is how do we actually get access to them to actually get these messages over and reinforce it to a point where they do actually carry out what we want to do, to keep everybody safe and sound. So that's where we are. We're limited as an organisation to what we can do, which is why we set up the client buddy scheme and why we link to the likes of IOSH and other informed groups to actually give support. So we're doing our best to actually access these other clients, these occasional clients, but I think every institution, if you like, body in the industry has got to work together to actually access all of them.
Thank you, Graham. Joseph Black asked, is competency of construction operatives regards to fire safety training, such as steel erectors, wrapped up within the building safety bill? So I'll come to Rich in a minute on that. If so, who's determining what suitable level of training for each occupation? I will jump in on here in a minute because I'm currently completing a diploma in construction fire safety risk management, and it's been a very intense course. I did a dissertation on it for the course, basically looking at fire safety training within the construction industry, and especially around the role of the responsible person on site, which normally gets handed down to the poor old site manager. At the end of the day, I don't believe what Joseph is saying here is that the site manager really knows what his responsibilities are under the fire regulation order or under the Health and Safety Work Act. And perhaps, and my conclusion to my dissertation was that we as an industry, we do need to look at fire safety training in the construction industry and help educate site managers and fire wardens on site, so that basically we can follow what's detailed in the Act. Just going over to Richard now. Competency is talked about a lot, but I don't think there is any much detail on how that competency is assessed.
No, I think you're right. I think it's throwing it back into industry, using phrases like skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours. So it's over to you to decide whether you have those skills, knowledge, experience, and behaviours, and the people who are relying on you, who are employing you or using you as a contractor, whether they think that you have, and then you have to demonstrate it. So I think the legislative sort of trends have moved away from setting out actual definitions of what is what, because if you remember in the early manifestations of CDM, there was a concern of the sort of plethora of consultancy setting out and saying you must have these qualifications, lest you will not be regarded as competent, and it sort of got out of control. So they moved over to setting it to industry and saying over to you, which is the natural sort of approach of health and safety. I suppose since the Health and Safety at Work Act, you set goals over to you, you prove to us that you have the competence, and doing courses like you're doing that, I suppose, is a classic way of setting out that you'd have those competencies, but you'd have to build on that, the experience and the knowledge. And I suppose you could look at the behaviour side of thing now, which has been added on to that. You could look at it and say, how are you using those qualities that you've got? Are you setting in an audit system? Have you got a review system? Have you got feedback systems, et cetera, that informs your safety management system or fire management system, and therefore you're demonstrating that you've got the necessary qualities? I think in each section or each sort of streams of areas of works, the separate sort of skill bases, they will set out their own perhaps criteria, but I don't think you'll find it coming from government.
Thank you, Richard. One for the whole panel now, and really maybe Graham kicks off. So how effectively does the panel think the industry presently shares good practice and lessons learned between different stakeholders, clients, contractors, regulators, etc.? And how can it be improved further?
Good question, that one. Back to where I was previously, where you've got engaged contractors, engaged clients, and engaged consultants, I think by and large we do fairly well, actually. There is a willingness to share both good and bad practice and what the consequences are. But the challenge again is basically getting that over to and packaged in a way where a smaller contractor, smaller consultant, smaller client can actually digest it and say, you know, I can pick the bones out of this, understand it, and apply it to what I'm doing. And that's an issue for all of us. There's another question about influencing via the planning process. And we, as a client group, we actually paid for an advertisement on the planning portal, which is then monthly newsletters about the client buddy scheme. And what we'd like to see ideally is that there's something actually on the planning portal which basically gives this sort of guidance and direction. But the problem is it is a commercial venture and they require paying to be able to do it. And it begs the question, so where does the money come from? And we've got limited funding. And like your organisation, you can't take on the whole industry and support it. You've got to try and do your bit.
I agree. I think we're getting better as an industry. I think having events like this, where we all promote what we're doing and we work together collaboratively to get knowledge out there, really. And at the end of the day, as it's been mentioned, there's an awful lot of information out there, and we've got to be careful that groups like IOSH and like supporting small employers don't reinvent the wheel. But we do actually update the information and we get it out there. And I think what we've done on the asbestos sheets for the small employers has really helped on that one. Malcolm, you see a lot of collaboration. You do it as your role as the chair of the construction group.
Yeah, we do not. If we're talking, there's lots of really good collaboration, and that needs to continue and even escalate and scale up. In terms of what working well together tries to do, and it's one of the HSE's 3 focus around reaching SMEs. I've mentioned this to you before, Nat. We need to find a way where we can communicate with the SMEs. And I tell you what the SMEs do. We have one guy who owns a company. Then he has anywhere between 3 and 10 employees working for him. The guy who owns a company spends most of his time outside of work preparing tenders, filling in competency questionnaires, chasing people for money. Never gets to see his family, his wife and kids. The guys who work for him just want to come to work, do their graft, go home and get paid. What they do at lunch breaks, at tea breaks, sitting in the van on the way home, they check their phones. They're watching TikTok, Snapchats, what the latest thing is. We should be putting small snapshot videos that interest them into the media area that they take notice of. All the excellent work that we all try to do, I've seen how much these guys are individuals take notice of posters or leaflets or anything. They might take notice if we make it interesting, short, snappy on a smartphone, and if we can subtly direct them to areas where we want them to go in terms of looking after themselves, in terms of preparing and working safely, I think that's a little bit of a step change that the industry needs.
I agree totally. And again, you know, like you said, we've discussed it. We know how popular sites like On the Tools are, you know, in Instagram and Facebook, and it would be really good to counter that culture almost that we see on the tools, and really get people engaged on that way. Richard, you got anything to add?
I just say it is so very, very difficult learning from history and getting messages out there. I suppose from my angle, I see it a lot in cases dealing with the HSE when something's gone wrong, and then there's the issues about how much knowledge of previous knowledge of, say, that accident mechanism is out there for people to learn from. But it is very, very difficult. Larger organizations will be able to capture that history and capture those cross-industry or intra-industry knowledge a lot easier than a smaller organization. So I'm afraid you are going to have to sort of be a bit more innovative along the lines that, say, Malcolm has set forward just earlier there.
I suppose to Joe, really, that's the challenge that we've got really now, with, you know, updating the Working Well Together website going forward is to try and make a platform that's going to be engaging, not just the people who can help out with Working Well Together, but people from the small employers as well who can engage with it.
Absolutely, we need data from both, really, in order for us to do the best job at regulating and getting the health and safety message out there. We need to know what it is that they're interested in hearing and what works. What is the best way to deliver that information?
Lee Daniel basically asks, he says, thanks for your webinar. Our question is, there are lots of groups out there currently trying to do lots of work around getting the message for health, safety and well-being to the boots on the ground, you know, the people actually doing work on site. Would there not be any benefit in trying to join this, for example, the Working Mind campaign, Mates in Mind together? Malcolm, I think we currently in the construction group, our last webinar that we did was based on Mates in Mind. We've got really good collaboration with them, and we talked about the next steps for construction companies on Mates in Mind. But Malcolm, if you just develop that a little bit more, please.
Yeah, just repeat that, Matt. Sorry, because somebody was talking to us on my ear over here. I'm right in the office.
So it's getting well-being and safety information
right
to the guys who are actually doing the work themselves.
Got you. I think for us as an organisation, and for me at project level, it's given them different viewpoints from people who have struggled or went through things, so that we do have, you know, when I was on the tools, safety was up here and well-being and health was down here. You didn't discuss it. Thankfully, it's around about there now, much better. People are talking about it more openly, and that just needs to continue. So at a project level, as I said, we're constantly looking at different ways we can get the people on site to think about their well-being and health exactly the same as safety, bringing in different speakers, etc., different people who've went through different experiences. We're actually going to I come up with these stupid crazy ideas, but what we're actually going to do, we're going to create a gardening club. We're going to create a Costian choir, and we're going to have a walking and talking club. All those things, 3 things are going to happen this year, where we can create, hopefully, create environments where and it primarily it starts with guys. All the research shows that that's where the majority of the suicides are, and the research shows that to start off talking about it like that, men are more comfortable amongst other men, and the idea is that you introduce the females into the conversation as part of that later on when you've got the group feeling comfortable. So that's what we're doing. We're constantly trying to think of different things, because if we just try to keep doing the same things over and over again, we will fail like a lot of the construction industry has. So I would encourage people to keep innovating. And when I say innovate, I don't mean rocket science stuff. Doesn't need to be anything like that. It can be a very simple idea, and trying to improve the way that we get those messages to everybody.
Thanks very much, Malcolm. Right, I'm going to do one last question now, but if anybody else has got any questions, then please throw them into the chat and we will try and answer them afterwards. I'm going to throw this one to Richard and Ren, which basically says, from David Morgan, most SMEs are employed by occasional clients and the only common denominator is the architect. If we can educate the architects at all levels via REBA, say, and then get through the information through to the clients and also the SMEs as part of REBA stage 2 to 5 process, would this not be a good way forward? Who wants to kick that one off?
I can have a quick crack at that and pass over to Gren. Funny enough, I was looking at one of the sets of regulations that are coming out from the Building Safety Act. I haven't really gone into it, but it is the architects, and it's looking for perhaps getting towards what David was asking there about competence for architects to fulfill their roles within the process, but particularly with the higher risk buildings. But that competence will spread out. So the competence sort of requirements that are sort of seeping out from the Building Safety Act and the associated regulations will have a specific set of regulations to deal with architects and how they interact on the site. So I know the higher risk buildings won't be necessarily dealing with small contractors, but that's not necessarily true, I suppose. But the architects' competence and their ability to fulfill their function, which I think is what David's talking about, may be enhanced by the secondary legislation coming in after the Act.
Right. I mean, this is very topical within the work we do within the client buddy scheme. Depending on what you're building, the most problematical areas are the smaller clients, particularly the smaller commercial clients who are on an industrial estate, say, and they're doing small works on premises. So in terms of REBA, they only normally get involved with the sort of the medium and the larger stuff. Invariably, the smaller bits of design are usually architectural technicians, technologists. But the same argument applies. You've got, it's about stepping up and actually giving the best possible advice. If you go back years and years ago, the typical architect used to be the kingpin, the lot. He used to basically be the custodian. A client would go to an architect, he'd oversee the lot, the design, the appointment of the contractor, supervision of the work, put cost plans together, which is where the traditional clerk of works came into it, because basically the architect employed the clerk of works. So that's where we were years ago. Nowadays, the average client, small clients, they want as cheap as design as possible. So therefore, all they want is to be able to get through planning and building regs, and then they want to say goodbye to the architect. So it's about education, and that architects, designers of all sorts, have got the capability and the capacity to give them far better support. But it may mean they need to employ somebody else as well, like an IOSH member. But the important thing is that people commissioning construction work need to understand they need professional support in many guises. And it's about getting the right organisation or organisations to give them that. So we promote it, but again, trying to get down to those occasional clients to actually influence them to do the right thing at the right time is, it's hard work.
Excellent. Thank you, Grant. No, great. Well, I'm going to bring this session to a close. I think it's been a brilliant collaboration. I'd like to thank Richard Vogt, Ren Tipper, Malcolm Shields, Joe Mitchell, and behind the scenes, Ben Pollard from IOSH, who's been able to pull this all together for us. I think it's been really engaging. I think it's really good to keep talking like this. And I hope that the members of the construction group and of Bristol and West and everybody else who's been watching in the UK and around the world, we topped up roughly around about just over 480 people at a point. So really pleased that it's gone well. But thank you for your input. Thank you for everybody watching, and we look forward to seeing you all soon.